Assalamu alaikum. I want to share a story. A few years ago I was working in High Wycombe, little city outside of London, and back in those days we didn't really have internet on our phones, so if you wanted to go check the internet you had to go to an internet cafe. I don't know if those exist anymore. Well, they should do, some of them. And I used to go to this internet cafe, and it was a convertible sort of internet cafe. So you had an internet cafe with all these computers, you had like a gaming section, and I still am a sort of gaming fan. So anyway, I liked spending a bit of time in that shop, and I used to speak to the owner, and you know, the relationship built up over a series of weeks. It got to a point where I thought, okay, let me try and give him some dawah. So I said to him, do you believe in God? And this is just some average guy. He owns this particular internet cafe and, you know, the gaming shop. And he looked at me with this very serious look, and he said, I believe in science. And I felt this religious energy. You know, like you're dealing with like a born-again Christian or Pentecostal or someone like this, you know. There's this sort of oomph in what he said. And I still remember, it took me back a bit, because I just expected him to be an irreligious guy, doesn't care about nothing. But the way he said it is almost like he's putting all his eggs into one basket. I believe in science. Now what I want to do is show you the difference between the public understanding of science and the academic understanding of science. Because the public understanding of science is, like this gentleman thought, if I ask you, do you believe in God? You can reply back with, I believe in science. That's supposed to be a rational response. But from an academic point of view, that's the equivalent of me saying, Osama, I want to invite you from Italy to London to come over to my house for dinner, and you reply back to me, I don't like stamp collecting. What's the problem?
Doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make any sense, because what I'm asking you for has nothing to do with your reply. I'm asking you to come over to my house for dinner, and you're replying back, I don't like stamp collecting. Right? There's a complete mismatch between the question being asked and the answer being given. So when someone says, I don't believe in God, when you ask someone, do you believe in God, and they say, I believe in science, and that's supposed to be an answer to the question, do you believe in God, it's a complete, it's like two, you know, trains that go past each other, right? It doesn't make any sense at all. What we're also going to be learning in this session is science and the link between science and other roots of knowledge. Because even if you don't talk about God, people generally like to say this, I believe in science. And what they mean by that is, I will believe things which are scientific, which are supposedly proven, which are supposedly true. Now what's happened here is, and with my daughters I sometimes watch, you know, their cartoons and stuff, and even in the cartoons there's a sort of scientific priming, right? Which is, do you have scientific proof for that? I'm going to prove that scientifically. They're linking the words proof with science, even to the point where if something has nothing to do with science, they will say, if I want to say Sufyan is being irrational, I will say you are being unscientific. So what's now happened is science is the same as truth, science is the same as reason, science is the same as logic, science is the same as being rational. Everything's just become one. And what I'm going to be showing in this session actually is, reason is, if you like, a massive source of knowledge, and a subset is science. That's actually a subset of reason. You can't, you know, think that this is the only way of looking at the world, because that lead to a whole bunch of absurdities. And again, this is the difference between the public understanding and the academic understanding. So firstly, does science lead to atheism, which is the first sort of question I'll begin off with, and does science disprove religious claims? So if there is a religious claim about the creation of the universe, creation of man, creation of whatever, does that mean science has disproven it? And like I mentioned previously, the aim here is not to attack science. The aim here is to show the difference between the academic understanding of science and the popular understanding of science. And the academic understanding of science is based upon the understanding of mainstream philosophers of science. And mainstream evolutionary biologists and physicists and chemists. We are not inventing new information here. We're just simply trying to show the academic understanding and the public understanding. And the difference between the two is the miscommunication which actually happens between academia and the public. So, science leads to atheism is based upon 4 false assertions. By the way, this session is going to be quite packed. In the next session, inshallah, we're going to unpack some of these things if they're not clear. Science is the only yardstick for truth. So remember, I believe in science. That's false. Science, since science works, its conclusions must be true. Science leads to certainty. Philosophical and methodological naturalism is the same thing. Now, what does that mean? Science works on certain assumptions. There's certain assumptions that you make when you are using the scientific method. One of these assumptions, we're going to be going over a little bit later, is methodological naturalism. And the confusion between that type of naturalism and the atheistic type of naturalism, which is philosophical naturalism, the conflation between these two different types of naturalism is also something which adds to the confusion between the public and the academic understanding. So what is science? Is from obviously the Greek word. The Greeks have given us a lot of words. Scientia, knowledge. You have observations, and based upon these observations you make inferences. Very, very important. Science is not just observations. Okay, I want you to consider something. So, I am someone who's looking at stars and I'm making measurements. I'm using observations and I'm making measurements. Ibrahim, am I doing science?
You're observing.
I'm observing, and then I try and make some theories about my observations.
Yeah.
That's science.
Sure.
So I'm using observations, but then I'm making theories based upon that, hypotheses based upon that. I'm trying to test that. That's science. Now imagine there's somebody else, and I don't do this, I'm just saying, imagine if I did. Imagine I'm a palm reader. I'm an astrologer, not an astronomer, an astrologer. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at stars and I'm writing down, right, Ibrahim next year, in May, he's going to get attacked by a wild horse in the fields of Sweden, right? I'm doing astrology, right? Astrology is not science. I'm using observations to come up with something which is non-scientific. Here, I'm using observations to come up with something which is scientific. So science is way more than observations. Science is when you take observations and you make theories based upon it, right? So, this is one of the confusions which comes up. Yeah, of course science leads to truth, because we know the shape of the earth and it's not going to change. We know that fossils exist and they're not going to change. We know that human beings have this particular feature in their genome, therefore it's not going to change. The confusion between observations and science. Science is where you have observations and from there you make a theory. From there you make a hypothesis, then you test it. Observations on their own are not science. They're just observations. So because observations are certain, we can obviously say that the sun is here. We can obviously say that the earth goes around the sun. We can say these things. Those things are not science. Those are just observations. Science is where you have observations and then you make theories based upon the observations. Do you guys get the difference? Okay, this is very important because you'll even find very popular, sometimes people who are supposed to be academics, but they're popularizers, saying stuff like, of course science is true because we know that human beings have 2 eyes. That's not going to change, except for mutants, but ignore the mutants for now, right? So, what we need to understand is there's a difference between observations and the theory. Yes?
So actually, the theory itself is what you call science.
Sorry?
The theory itself is what you call science.
The theory itself is science, yes, not the observations. Okay, science is the only yardstick for truth. What does that mean? Because we have a multinational team here. Yardstick is basically your sort of measurement for what you believe to be the truth, the gospel truth, right? Science is the only yardstick for truth. So, this idea is based upon a misunderstanding of what science can actually achieve. Because what we're doing is we're not attacking science. We love science, we use science. Muslims actually, and I have a complete different lecture on this, were actually the ones who came up with the scientific method itself. The scientific inductive method as we know it today was put together by Hassan ibn Haytham approximately 1,000 years ago, who was a Quranic scholar, and he was a scientist, and he said himself, I am doing science because I want to get closer to God. The scientific method is something which is supposed to go back to Francis Bacon, who existed about 800 years ago. Francis Bacon, interestingly enough, didn't claim the scientific method came from him. In fact, Roger Bacon, Roger Bacon, who's supposed to be the one who generated the scientific method, he actually wrote a summary of Ibn Haytham's work, and he linked his work back to Hassan ibn Haytham. Now, the people before Hassan ibn Haytham were the Greeks. The Greeks were not doing science. They were doing proto-science. What does that mean? It means they were doing theorization. They didn't have a particular method for falsification, for testing, for inductive experimentation. They were mostly speculating, right? They were theorizing. And this is inshallah going to be something which is going to be covered in much more detail in our upcoming publication, Failed Hypothesis, Essays on Darwinism, Atheism, Science and stuff, where we actually go through mainstream Western sources. We're not using any Islamic sources at all, and showing that the scientific method itself started because of Hassan ibn Haytham, and the Greeks before did not have science, and Europe itself, in fact the earliest scientists in Europe, even here in the UK, the first scientist in Britain, his name was Adelaide of Bath. He travelled to Spain, learned Arabic, learned how to do science, came back, and what did he do? Did he say, yeah, I got this great science and it's all from me? He said, no, I learned this from my, according to him, Arab masters. And he said, the Arab masters, they are not led by blind faith, they are led by reason. And this is all across Europe. In fact, even Daniel of Morley, again another Arabist, who went to Syria to go and study under the Arabs, he came back and he set up a particular university approximately 200 years after the first university in Fez in Morocco, which was Oxford University. So the founder, one of the founders of Oxford University, Daniel of Morley, actually travelled to Muslim countries to actually learn about how to give science. In fact, there's even evidence of syllabuses being brought over, and even the education system itself being imported from the Muslim world, which the Muslims themselves initially got from the madrasa system. Because the madrasa system wasn't just, Quran, it also included astronomy, medicine, and these other sort of things. Anyway, that's something in more detail in that book. So science is not the only yardstick to truth. Because we understand how science works, we can say these things based upon what mainstream philosophers of science say. Science is limited to observations. It's morally neutral. So, for example, a scientist can tell you what's going to happen when you take a knife and you cut human skin. It cannot tell you whether you operating on someone to save their life is good, or you, like what's happening in London nowadays, getting stabbed left, right and centre is a bad thing. So science can't tell you those things. It cannot answer why things happen. For example, I've made a cake, and I've baked this cake, and my brother Amir, I want to give him this cake. Science he can use science to tell me the chemical composition of the cake, what temperature it was baked at, and all these sorts of things, but he cannot say why I made the cake. And the actual reason why I made the cake may be that I want him to be overweight and get diabetes, or it may be that I want to put him to sleep and rob him, whatever. I could have a whole bunch of reasons for giving him the actual cake. It cannot delve into the personal, it cannot address some metaphysical questions. So, what does this mean? Firstly, we have this thing, yeah, we believe in science. Science is the way to truth. Okay, well, put it this way. Science accepts some metaphysics. Metaphysics as in things which are not, we can observe. These are things beyond physics, right? So as a scientist, before I do science, I have to accept the existence of numbers. I have to accept that the world exists, right? I can't prove that scientifically, I have to accept it. I have to accept that the future is going to be like the past. So the sun has risen up today, it's going to rise up tomorrow. I have to accept that every effect has a cause. All these types of metaphysical questions, metaphysical concepts, science simply has to accept. Even logic. Science cannot prove logic, science assumes logic, and the purest type of logic is mathematics. Science has to accept mathematics, accept this. Also, scientists, they have to accept testimony. You can't prove testimony using science, but say I'm a scientist, and I was born in, 2010, and not 2010, sorry, 1985. I'll be a very smart, evil child. So 1985, and basically I go to school and I learn about the Big Bang Theory. I learn about Darwinian evolution. I learn about quantum theory. I haven't done any of the experiments. In fact, all the science we've all learned in our life, we've never done the experiments. It's based on testimony. So again, science is based on all these things that science cannot prove, which is not a bad thing. It just goes to show that, I believe in science. Well, okay, fine. If you believe in science alone, then how do you explain testimony? How do you explain mathematics? How do you explain logic? How do you explain the existence of other minds? How do you explain the world is real? How do you explain the fact that we have a mind that we can actually trust? There's a whole bunch of things you have to completely deny. But that's not the way that science actually operates. Of course, there are other sources of knowledge. So if you I'm standing here, and Brother Sufyan, he tries to find out the beliefs that I actually hold. It could be me, it could be anybody on this planet. Anyone sane, by the way, right? Here's the clause, anyone sane. So anyone sane, he wants to find out what's in their brain. If he was to slice my brain in half and look at my roots of knowledge, here's my roots of knowledge. I have direct experience using my eyes. I have testimonial truths. I have scientific findings which I've done myself, and so on and so on and so on. 99%, more than 99% of my beliefs are actually purely testimonial. And that's true with all human beings. The beliefs that you hold are actually testimonial. So for example, do you believe in Madagascar? Yeah, it exists as a country. Have you been there? Okay, have you met anybody from Madagascar?
No.
Do you speak Madagascarism or whatever it's called? Okay, how do you know it exists? Testimony. You can say, you know what, I've seen a picture, but someone told you that's Madagascar. It could be Mexico, right? So science, if you say it's the only route of knowledge, then you're cutting off 99% of your beliefs. That's without even going into other things. For example, we can use deductive and logical concepts. Deduction and induction, these are things which cannot be proven scientifically. They are simply accepted by science. So when someone says, I only believe in science, then they can only believe in things they have experimented themselves. And there's for those of you who've seen the debate between Hamza and Lawrence Krauss, Lawrence Krauss says, I believe in science, and Hamza explains to him, science is based on testimony, is based on this. He started laughing. He's like, what's testimony? How's it based on? He explained to him, no, actually, this is the way that philosophers actually understand it. But he asked him, do you believe in evolution? He said, yes. He said, have you done the experiments? No. So again, it's testimony. But even intelligent people sometimes don't realize what they're actually saying. Even when you say, I believe in science, if you walk into the British Library and you walk into the science section, which has, by the way, the British Library, every single book that's published in this country, you have to send a copy there. So every single scientific book that's been published in the UK, we have a copy at the British Library. If you were to walk into the British Library and you're like, I'm a great scientific guy, I love science, and you read all these books somehow, you still only believe in testimony. Because you haven't done the experiments yourself. And our beliefs that we hold, we believe the testimony of geographers, hence why we believe in countries. We believe in the testimony of historians, hence why we believe Plato existed, Aristotle existed, Genghis Khan existed. You can't say Genghis Khan existed if you believe in science purely. Legend says it, because no one knows where his grave is, that they went to bury him, and once they buried him in a secret location, they killed the people who knew where he was buried, right? No one knows where he is, right? Technically. I have a great grandmother, right? 50 generations ago. I can't prove that scientifically. I don't have her DNA, I don't have her clothes, I don't have her perfume, I don't know where her grave is. I know she exists because I exist. That's logic. You can't prove that scientifically. So when someone says, I only believe in science, you're literally shutting off all the doors in the room, switching off all the lights, sitting in a corner, in fact in a cupboard in a corner, and saying, this is my worldview, this few little inches that I can actually see in front of me. So it's actually a very it's a very big problem actually amongst the public, that they think science is a root of knowledge. Sorry, is the root of knowledge. It's of course a root of knowledge, but they say it's the root of knowledge. It's the way of looking at the entire world. Science cannot prove necessary truths. So science can obviously not prove that, so okay, if A, then B. That's logic. A, therefore B. This simple logic. Any software guys know that you have certain codings, right? So if this, then this. This, therefore this. Science cannot even prove that. That's just completely out of the realm of science. Science just has to assume that these sorts of necessary truths exist. Science works, its conclusions are true. Okay. So this is a really interesting contention. Something working is equated to truth, right? So science works, therefore it's true. And this is really summarized in a nice conversation, not nice but funny conversation that happened between Richard Dawkins, and with him was the philosopher Stephen Law, and this is available on YouTube, in which they have this discussion. So if you just put in Stephen Law, Richard Dawkins, you can watch the entire lecture. So in the lecture, somebody asks a really profound question. Someone says, and they bring up this ancient problem which David Hume pointed out, which is known as the problem of induction, which is that if you have, say, observations of 100 sheep which are white, you say, based upon my observations that there's 100 white sheep, all sheep are white, or the next sheep which I'm going to see is white. So you're using a limited set of observations to make a general conclusion. David Hume rightly pointed out that actually you can't really say that with certainty, because in the future you may come across a black sheep. This is the problem of induction, or the black swan problem as it's otherwise known. This particular problem is a very serious philosophical problem. And because people don't understand the difference between popularizers like Richard Dawkins, who's not a philosopher, and academics who actually study this stuff, they just look up to him as if he knows. So anyway, in this interview that was happening between Lawrence Krauss and Richard Dawkins, they were taking questions and answers from the audience. And somebody in the audience asked, how do you justify the scientific method? Because the theories that you have, you can always get new observations which can challenge the old theories. So Richard Dawkins, in his very stylish sort of way, and being very, naive, he says, science works. Rockets fly, medicine works, this, science works, therefore it's true. And then he adds on, science works, bitches, and everyone starts clapping, right? It's a really stupid video, because he thinks he's got this energy, this profound status that I can just say this in public. I can call everyone in the room a certain expletive, and everyone's going to clap, and they did, because they're like penguins. So Stephen Law, under his breath, because he doesn't want to correct his Richard Dawkins, under his breath he goes, well, that's induction. But then he moved on, because he was asked, how do you justify induction And he said, using induction, which is circular reasoning. So he was asked, science can work because you have you're assuming the future is going to be like the past, but you can always come up with new observations which can challenge it. And what he basically said is, it works because it works, essentially. But what I found interesting in that video is this: Stephen Law is a philosopher and an academic, and he understands the problem of induction, and he knows that what Richard Dawkins said there was absolute bull. Total nonsense. But he did not correct him. He just murmured, that's induction. And Richard Dawkins didn't even notice. And he just moved on swiftly. Which goes to show you they have a public image. They want to create this image about certain personalities. They're infallible, like the imams of some sort, right? There's some sort of infallible imams, right? Now, they want to create this impression, but anybody with 2 brain cells will realize, no, this is not right. I mean, you don't even need to have 2 brain cells technically, but you could be an amoeba. You'd realize actually the problem of induction is not going to be solved, and it hasn't been solved for the last 300 years since David Hume actually raised it, just because a public figure says it works. Right. And if you pick up any basic book on the philosophy of science, it's going to say something like this. This is an Oxford University publication. Historically, there are many cases of theories that we now believe to be false, but that were empirically quite successful. So they worked really well, but they turned out to be false. This is not unknown. This is not something weird. This is not, we're not bringing up some sort of crazy opinion, minority opinion amongst philosophers. Philosophy of science is a very deep field, but there is something that they do agree about, which is that the problem of induction is real, and therefore scientific conclusions cannot be written in stone. Also, Evidence in Evolution by the philosopher of biology Elliot Sober. This is a Cambridge University publication. He says false models can sometimes work better than true ones. But then you'll be like, how do you know what the true ones are? Well, they're the ones that haven't been proven false yet. So it's actually really difficult. It's actually really, really difficult to put up an argument that because it works is true. So let me try and give you some live examples. So you have, I'll give you high fives as well. That means I've got 10 minutes left. So you have live examples in front of us, in front of our very eyes. Imagine there's somebody driving a really nice car. I don't know the names of cars because I don't drive, but he's driving a really, really nice car, one of the cars from like Fast and the Furious, whatever. I don't watch that film, but still. And he has nitrogen boosters. And he's going really, really fast with these nitrogen boosters, right? And he's full of energy. He's like, this is amazing. Science has given us this amazing thing, nitrogen boosters. And, you knock on his window and he puts the window down. And you basically say to him, I heard what you said. You're driving this car. You have these nitrogen boosters. But let me just give you the history of how nitrogen was discovered. Nitrogen is an element and it's real. But it was discovered using a theory in chemistry known as phlogiston, which turned out to be a completely false theory. But that false theory helped us discover nitrogen, which is real. So a false theory can bring about knowledge of things which we can observe today. Likewise, if you existed, say 300 years ago, around the time of Newton, and you were to look at the change the Newtonian model brought to the world, you were just to sit there on a chair on Mars and watch all over the world the scientists that were impacted by Newtonian mechanics. You were to watch all of the extensive advancements that were made in physics and all of the achievements that were made. 250 years you would observe a model that worked really well, the Newtonian model. To the point that if you were to make a prediction, where is this planet going to be in 6 months' time from now, and calculate that using the Newtonian model, it would be there, exactly there. It worked well for 250 years. Einstein came along and showed it was false. Time and space, according to the Newtonian model, is fixed. Einstein came along and said it's actually like fabric. According to the Newtonian model, gravity pulls. Einstein inverted that and said actually space-time curvature pushes down, so it's a pushing thing. Einstein came along and he changed even the definition of mass that was being used in those calculations, which were working perfectly. So 250 years, the best scientific model you can argue in our history that's worked amongst the most successful of theories, but the most successful you can easily argue is Newtonian mechanics, Newtonian model, and it turned out to be false. But it gave us a whole bunch of new information. So just because something works doesn't mean it's true. If you were to walk into any university in the world, and it's a challenge, any university in the world, and you were to walk into the physics department if they had one, and you were to ask the physicists, ask the professors, ask the research associates, guys, do you believe in general relativity? What are they going to say? Yes. Do you believe in quantum mechanics? What are they going to say?
Yes.
Yes. These two theories, which are held by consensus in physics, contradict each other. They both can't be true. Not only do we have examples in history, we have examples live today of consensus, of ijma, of physicists who believe in this and believe in that, but they both fundamentally can't be true. Yes?
Could you repeat the two things you said?
Quantum mechanics, general relativity. Einstein's general relativity and Niels Bohr's quantum mechanics. Okay? So science leading to truth because it works is not something which you can actually argue for. We've just covered that. Science leads to certainty. Another publication, Philosophy of Science, a new introduction by Gillian Barker and Philip Kitcher. Same thing, science is revisable. Look at this. Hence to talk about scientific proof is dangerous. We use the word scientific proof all the time. But we're saying is to use that word is dangerous because it fosters the idea that conclusions are graven in stone.
SubhanAllah, suboor. Funny thing, you mentioned scientific truths can be written in stone, can't be written in stone. So actually, they can only be written with a pencil, so you can erase it afterwards.
Yes, definitely. Write in pencil because you're going to have to rub it out.
Yeah, afterwards.
Scientific theories can only be proven false. If a theory claims that something will be observed under certain conditions and is not observed, then the theory is proven false. All birds that die on a Friday, will do so in mid-flight. The old model of philosophy of science was falsification, that you can prove theories false. But the new model, which is scientific holism, you can even revive dead theories. Right? So the latest that we know is whether you believe in this old model or you believe in the new model or you believe in what's known as scientific realism, which we can cover in the Q&A, or scientific anti-realism, whatever view of science you hold as a philosopher of science, whatever it is, one thing no one disagrees about is that scientific conclusions are not written in stone. Again, science is dynamic. If you look at the history of science over the last 300 years, chemistry, physics, biology, every single subfield of those sciences, over a longer period of time, you're going to see that actually they go through massive revolutions. They go through massive changes. Okay. A contention is brought up by some people, which can be brought up by some people, which is about scientific, induction and Islamic sources. So what they say is, because you're attacking induction, you're going to be attacking Islamic sources. The first reply is, we're not attacking induction. We're merely showing this is the academic understanding of induction. Induction is limited observations, general conclusion. Right? Now, inductive arguments is where you go from a limited set of observations to a general conclusion. And they're basically saying, don't you have induction in your isnad, in your collection of narrations? The way we got the Quran, the way we got narrations of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So, Islamic sources and induction, is it a contradiction? This is a false contention, because with induction, with inductive arguments, what are you basically doing? You're basically saying, I have observed 100 sheep which are white, therefore all sheep are white. You are adding a new claim of knowledge. In our isnad, in our traditions, we are not adding. So we're not saying Ibn Abbas said Qul huwallahu ahad and therefore wal asr. We're not making a jump. We are merely mirroring. We are saying he said this and he said this and he said this. So this is inductive reasoning, not inductive argumentation. Yes, Ibrahim.
But someone might say, for instance, that if you look at the isnad of the hadith, they say that they take the knowledge from this person, or they take narration from this person because no one witnessed the life from him, and therefore he's truthful. But isn't that kind of inductive as well? Because only a certain number of people witnessed him, and maybe there are others who could have witnessed against him.
That's a very good point. And that is something which can be addressed by looking at testimony. What is valid and invalid testimony? Because this is a bit of a cross between induction and testimony. Because testimonial truths is a separate source of knowledge to induction. Some of you can cover a bit more detail in the Q&A, but this is basically linked to testimony and the epistemology of testimony. So the science of epistemology, sorry, not the science, the epistemology of testimony, we have to basically look into what is valid sources of knowledge, what is not valid sources of knowledge. How do you decide what is these particular sources of knowledge, and how do we know that, okay, we can trust these and we can use these sources of testimony to reject these? Because you might get counter testimonies. But this is a deeper topic within the epistemology of knowledge, right? So I don't want to delve into that, because we're getting away from the philosophy of science going into epistemology here. But that's the way I would address it. You just go down the route of testimony, explaining what is valid and what is invalid. Okay. How long do I have?
You can keep going if you want, or do they want a break for discussion?
I was just about to finish. So 2-3 minutes.
After you finish.
So that is the contention which is actually brought up in regards to this. But this is not really something which you're going to come across. What you are going to come across is something which we're going to be covering near the end, which is about taking a scientific conclusion and challenging the Quran directly and saying, these two contradict. Philosophical naturalism, as I mentioned previously, as a scientist, when you walk into this room and you wear the scientific coat, you are assuming you are only going to be looking at physical effects and physical causes, and you're assuming there is no non-physical entity that we're dealing with. There is no soul, there is no independent mind, there is nothing like this. Even from a scientific point of view, when you are looking at the world, you cannot say this is morally right, this is morally wrong. The person had this intention. No. From a scientific point of view, you're assuming everything is physical. That's known as methodological naturalism, and there's nothing wrong with that. Because Hassan ibn Haytham, he adopted methodological naturalism. He actually said we cannot go beyond our experiences when using science. But he was not somebody who believed in philosophical naturalism. He didn't believe nature was all there was. But as an assumption, he assumed we're only going to be looking at physical effects and physical causes. Philosophical naturalism is the belief there is nothing but matter. Right? That belief is different to methodological naturalism. And inshallah we can cover this more in the Q&A, because this is one of those things that there's loads of questions about, and sometimes even this concept is a bit hard to put your head around. But there's a difference between the two. Philosophical naturalism assumes the non-scientific assumption, this is very important, of philosophical naturalism, the view that there is no supernatural and everything can be explained by physical processes. But as pointed out by philosophers of science like Michael Roos, if you want a concession, I've always said naturalism is an act of faith. What he means here is philosophical naturalism, right? There's two different things here. Just because science works, you can't say philosophical naturalism is true. Methodological naturalism, as I explained, is you basically say everything we look at, we're going to look at natural effects, natural causes. Methodological naturalism has nothing to do with atheism. There's actually a lot of literature written on this. This is what the evolutionary biologist Scott Todd how he summarizes it. The first part of this quotation is missing, so apologies for that. What he basically says is, even if all the data points to an intelligent designer, such a hypothesis is rejected from science because it's not naturalistic. So he says, no matter what the data says, we cannot say there's a God. That's methodological naturalism. Then he goes on to say, of course the scientist as an individual is free to embrace a reality that transcends naturalism. Right? Okay, also, science tells us the how, not the why. Knowing the how doesn't negate the why. So for example, even in the Quran we have this example in front of us. In the Quran, in Surah Mulk, in chapter 67, it mentions, do you not see the birds in the sky with their wings going up and down? None holds them up except God. So you have this explanation. Look at the bird. It's up there in the sky and it's up there and it's flapping its wings. None holds it up except God. So you're getting two types of explanation here. You're getting a physical explanation. Lift, drag, Bernoulli's theorem, you calculate how it can fly. You got that physical causation there. The Quran is mentioning the wings. But then the Quran says none holds it up except God. So the how and the why are two different things. Explaining how something works doesn't explain why it's there in the first place. Who created it? I can have a really good functioning car, and somebody can come along like Sufyan and explain to me how the car works really, really well, because he's a mechanical engineer, mashallah. And physicist. So he can put in, okay, you put in petrol, you have combustion, this is the way the engine works, this is the way the axials work, this is the way the gears work, this is the way the car actually functions, here's how the electronics work. Imagine if he spent 60 hours explaining to me how the car works, how. And then he said to me, therefore no one designed the car. Would that make sense?
No.
No, the how doesn't negate the why. Right? So these are two different things. Science does not lead to atheism. Science cannot observe God. There are other sources of knowledge. This is a summary. Conflation between methodological and physical naturalism leads to this confusion. Explaining how things work do not disprove that they have a creator. Again, science disproving religion, this is the false assertion that's based on the view that scientific conclusions are absolute and certain, conflates these types of naturalism. So, just to give you a live example. We have this fear in us that we have to sometimes try and make the Quran fit scientific conclusions which are accepted by everyone. We have this fear. But the problem is, what we are basically doing is this. We are taking the authority of science and we are misunderstanding what it can actually achieve. There may be a scientific consensus which is held by every single physicist in the world which contradicts the Quran. We don't say, therefore we give up the science and therefore the Quran is right, or nor do we say the Quran is right and we reject the science. We do what the academic person would do. We say sciences work based on the assumption of methodological naturalism. You have the problem of induction, you have underdetermination, you have other problems in the philosophy of science. Also, we have the Quran which we believe to be true for X, Y, Z reasons. If there's a contradiction between the two, we still retain our belief, but we accept this as a working model. A very good example is this. Every single physicist in the world, around the 1940s and 50s, every single one, there was a consensus amongst physicists that the universe is eternal. The universe always existed. The static state model was accepted by everyone. It was accepted by Niels Bohr, by Kelvin, by Einstein. Even in Einstein's general relativity, he incorporated the eternal universe. Does the Quran say the universe is eternal? No. So you had all of the scientific community rejecting the Quran in terms of its claim, right? Now, as a Muslim in the 1950s, what would you have done, right? Oh, all scientists believe the universe is eternal. The Quran says the universe is not eternal. Therefore, let me make videos about how these two can be reconciled, right? And publish them on YouTube, like is happening in the last couple of days. and get some fitna to do it. This doesn't make any sense. You would say, actually, you know what, this is science, this is what it's based upon, I'll accept it as a working model, I'll work within the field, I'll contribute to the field, but I'll not accept it to be absolutely true, because even philosophers of science understand it's not absolutely true, right? I'll accept it as a working model, however. In the 1960s, 70s especially, what started to happen, the static state model was completely overridden by the Big Bang model, which says the universe has a beginning. In another 100 years' time, maybe the Big Bang model will be thrown out and you'll have another type of eternal universe. Just because a scientific consensus challenges the Quran, it doesn't mean anything, right? It doesn't mean you have to reject one or accept the other or whatever. That's not even the greatest controversy. By the way, that's a much more broader consensus than Darwinian evolution or other things, right? But let me just put in something which is even more deeper than that. 1940s, there was a consensus amongst physicists and astronomers that the sun is stationary at the center of the solar system and the earth goes around the sun. The sun is stationary, does not move. The Quran says the sun has an orbit. So now you have not even a contradiction between science, you have a contradiction between an observation, which is the sun being stationary, and the Quran. A complete contradiction. Again, we don't believe science is the only root of knowledge. We believe testimony is the root of knowledge. We believe induction, deduction, mathematics, so on and so forth. So what would you have done if you were there in the 1940s and all the physicists said the universe has the sun is stationary at the center of the solar system? Well, there is one interpretation you could have gone back and looked at, which is the interpretation about the multi-layered and the multi-leveled approach, which is this classical one, which is maybe this was describing the way that the Arabs saw the world rather than the way that the world, I'll do your question after this inshallah, rather than the way the actual world is. You could do that. But let's just say you didn't know that, and you just believe the Quran said the sun has an orbit, and science said the sun doesn't have a orbit. You just say, okay, maybe something new can come in the future, right? Maybe our interpretation is wrong. Maybe the way we're looking at the data is wrong, even though it's right in front of us. In the 1940s onwards, we discovered, using the Hubble telescope, that the universe is much bigger than we thought, and the sun has a orbit around the Milky Way galaxy, which is approximately 200 million years it takes, right? So the sun does have an orbit. Now we could say, hey, scientific miracle. But let's not do that, yeah? What we need to understand is, if there's a contradiction between science and there's a contradiction between the Quran, we don't need to freak out. We don't need to try and justify, maybe it fits. Because science can contradict the Quran, and science can contradict other science. And science today can contradict the science of the future and the science of the past. And we've got live examples of that. What we need to do is take a step back and look at the epistemic roots of knowledge and understand the weight of each one. I'm going to do your question in Q&A because I'm going to wrap up, yeah?
It's actually not a question. It's
sure.
more like, couldn't you answer in this way as in it's a problem of empiricism? Like, you said it was an observation, right?
Yep.
As in observing the sun being stationary. And you observe via your senses and the material that you have. Can't your materials and your senses let you down as well?
Yes, we could do that in Q&A.
Okay.
But that's one route you could actually take it down. So quick overview. Science is not the only root of knowledge. Science works, so it must be true. This is a false assumption. The problem of induction, we'll be doing this in the seminar. An atheist says to you, science and religion are incompatible. How would you respond? So think about some of these things. There's also a discussion. And I'm going to leave these up on the board during the break so you guys can actually think about it. So Richard Dawkins, in this little thing, what he basically says is, every person I met believes, he's talking about Muslims here, if there's a disagreement between the Quran and science, then the Quran wins. It's just utterly deplorable and blah blah blah. He goes off on his run, yeah? So he's basically complaining when he went to a Muslim school and he basically found out that the Muslim children there believed if the science and Quran contradicted, that they would choose the Quran over science. And look at the way I'm wording it now. how would you respond? Don't just giving you a bit of a hint here, don't just say the Muslims are right. How is it that they could have given a better response, and why is he wrong as well? So think about some of these things. We'll have a break inshallah.
What we're doing is 2-minute break inside the classroom. 2 minutes stretch, and then we'll continue Q&A, and then we'll break off.
Okay,
Yeah?
so 2-minute break in the classroom,
Yeah.
and then we'll
Q&A,
Q&A.
and then the break.
Fine. So think about some of these things inshallah.
Would you repeat the question? This one.
What he's basically saying here is he's saying every Muslim that I met in that school, they believed if there's a contradiction between the Quran and science, they would choose Quran.
Well, what's the objective now?
The objective is, he's saying this is utterly deplorable and blah 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 blah. He's complaining. How would we respond to his complaint against us?
Respond to who?
Richard Dawkins. Yeah, sure.
Conception.
Let me know when you're ready to go again, and I'll just turn the button.
Sure. If anybody wants, there's some snacks in the back and stuff.
Yeah, cakes, pastries, juice.
For those brothers who don't know, that's Brother Steve at the back. He's the only member of Aira who likes frog legs. He's from France.
Like frog legs.
That's the usual British sense of humor. Yeah.
Sorry, what? I don't understand.
So that's the British sense of humor.
Oui.
I saw the word play there.
Brothers, have a 1-minute stretch. In the classroom. Stretch your legs.
Osama, I'm remembering when Osama came here a few years ago, and I thought to make him feel home, I'll take him to an Italian coffee shop. He walked in and he had this look of disgust. He's looking at everything, he's like, that's not coffee. And when I went to Italy, I realized their coffee is like really small. And they don't add milk, and it's not like that. Here the coffee are that big.
Size matters.
But he's really offended, man. He's like, this is not coffee.
Let's pass by. No, I don't.
Cafe Nero doesn't exist in Italy, does it?
Okay, sure.
No, cafe, I think it's only in Italy. The real coffee.
One thing is, the company Cafe Nero is seen in the UK as an Italian company. It's not an Italian company, yeah.
It says on it, Italian coffee company.
Yeah.
Which one? Which company?
It's a company called Cafe Nero. And it claims it's an Italian coffee company, and I took him there, and he said, this isn't Italian. No. Okay, I'll see you guys. Let's start inshallah. Mohsin, you want to do this?
Yes, give me one moment.
Sure. You enjoying the seminar? Live? Okay, Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. So, you're in this scenario. Someone says to you, Quran, how can you say the Quran is right? Because the Quran contradicts science. You know, I went to this Muslim school, this is what the children said. So throw out to me some answers then. Yes. Don't you raise your hand, by the way, just.
Okay. I mean, let's not discuss whether he misworded them or misrepresented their answer, but I think this is an issue of first principles. He has first principles in saying that science is absolute truth. And our first principle says that there is a God, there is an eternal being who created the heavens and the earth, and he gave us instructions that are absolutely true. What I would do if I got this question right now, I would explain to him why science is not absolute truth and not the only truth. I would explain to him why it's fallible, why it can fail us, and why it's prone to change, and why we would say that I stick to my first principles in believing that there is a creator, and the instructions he gave us, these are the only absolute truth.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You're along the right lines. I like the way that you're going down the route of undermining his world, his belief in it.
Okay.
However, and I want someone to add to Ibrahim's answer, I just want to add a little thing. It's kind of like, I'm like, have you stopped beating your wife yet? Right? Have you stopped beating your wife yet? Have you stopped beating your wife yet?
Doesn't make sense.
Okay. So what's happened is, I'm asking you a question, no matter which way you answer it. So if I say to you, have you stopped beating your wife? What happens if you answer yes? It means you're beating her in the past.
Acknowledging that
Yeah. What if you say no?
you're baiting me,
Yeah.
like Kathy knew.
Yeah. So what if you say no? It means you're still beating her up.
Yeah, of
You
course.
punched her on the way in. Yeah. So the problem is, no matter which way you answer my question, you're trapped. You're between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
Because I have built up a false dichotomy. I've built up a false thing, a false assumption, and I'm attacking you. Have you stopped beating your wife yet? Your first thing is not to answer my question, but say, your question is invalid. You're assuming a false thing, which is I was beating my wife. Okay? What he's doing here is, before you answer him, you want to challenge the false dichotomy he's making up. And the false dichotomy he's making up is Quran, religion, idiots, versus science, rationality. No matter which way you answer it, it's going to sound like he's saying, yeah, it's religion versus science, and you're like, I accept it's religion versus science, and here's my answer. There's a better way of answering it. Attack his question. Attack his thing. So that's a little prod for whoever wants to go next.
I have a thing which
Sure.
more in the understanding of why he's pointing out this. I mean, it is of course indeed religion, science, but it's also from the first principles what Ibrahim said. I mean, he's thinking of Quran is also, I mean, it's not scientific. There are no observations. There's not even a relation between how science is done today and the Quran. So he doesn't want, or he's not willing to make. He's not able to make a relation between science and Quran. There is no relation between science and Quran from his point of view.
Yes.
So understand, I mean, that's how I would understand his question, why
Sure.
he's posing this question.
Sure.
And correct, I mean, there is also some emotional going on. Religious people and scientific people, I mean, these are going against each other. I would, in this learning process, before I would have said, I mean, these are not contradictions, there's no contradiction. The way, the best way maybe to attack the question is, I would show that these, I mean, there's no contradiction between both. I mean, as what you said before, you can have science, but it doesn't say that something is right or wrong. It is an observation. You make a theory.
Yep.
Things can change. That's one thing. And let's keep the Quran and the religious aspect and the moral aspect outside of this. It doesn't say that religious people are non-scientific.
Yeah, you're along the right lines, and I get a sense for what you're trying to say. You're trying to find a way of actually putting it in terms of words, what you would say to him. An additional prod is this. It's basically like me making an accusation against you. The first thing you need to do is not accept the accusation. So you're along the right lines that he's first saying Quran, religion, science, they contradict each other. Let's have a discussion. So the first thing you want to do is you want to detach the two. How do you do that? I'm leaving that up to you guys.
maybe I totally agree to not answering the question by one sentence, rather than explaining our narrative, how we see this weapon. But I want to add a very specific point. Maybe it's not maybe it's not the most clever part to give an answer or any kind of response to the person who asked, but rather to an audience. So if I would receive this question, there is any kind of audience and people listens to me, I would rather, take this dialogue as a method to convey my message to the other people.
Yes.
Because, Suboor, the chance that Mr. Dawkins, follows our narrative, even if we gave him 1 million examples, the chance is low. But the 1,000 people or 10,000 people see us in the debate. Maybe we get the heart and the touch, and on the
Sure.
streets, that's the same. So my, approach to take this as a show to convey the messages.
Excellent. So, I agree with you totally. But then what do we say? I agree totally. Because it's actually a lot of debates are like this. The aim is not for the actual debater. He already knows. It's like I found out a few years ago, there was a woman from Pakistan who has a PhD in Islam, basically, and she claims that hijab is not fard. The problem is she doesn't want to accept that. It's not got to do with, let me give her daleel. She knows the daleel. Nothing to do with that. You're right. How do you untangle that though? And I'm not saying your answer is wrong, I'm not saying your answer is wrong. They're actually very good compared to what people would normally say, which is start defending the Quran, right? But how would you actually take his false dichotomy, science versus religion, break that in an instant? Like, what would they do in Kung Fu movies? The guy's coming with a knife, one move, khalas.
Couldn't you kind of say that he came with the assumption that
Yes.
there is a contradiction between the Quran and science?
Yes, although I'm going to tweak what you said.
Okay.
You came with an assumption that science leads to certainty. And then what you do is you don't say my religion versus your science. You say philosophy of science, the academic understanding versus your popular nonsense. So he's building up a fight between Islam and science. You take him down and you build up a fight between his false popular narratives and mainstream academia. You do that, and what automatically happens is he starts attacking the academics. And I've done this, alhamdulillah, by the permission of Allah, in debates. Even in the debate which I had with Aaron Ra, he started attacking the philosophers. Before he wanted to make science versus religion, science versus religion, science versus religion, I kept saying, this is what philosophers say, this is what philosophers say. He started to actually attack the Cambridge University philosopher and saying, oh, he would say that because he believes in God. I said, no, he's an atheist. So even if he believed in God, since he's a Cambridge publisher, right? I mean, he's published with Cambridge, he's a philosopher of biology. It doesn't matter even if he was a believer in God. But what happened was, Aaron Ra was trying to build up the fight between religion and science. I made the fight between the popular narrative of people like him and Richard Dawkins and mainstream academics. And what does he start doing? He starts attacking them. What happens then is the audience sees the real battle is between the popular understanding and the academic understanding. It's not between religion and science. Right? And that is very powerful. So you basically say, you're assuming science leads to truth, and your popular understanding is out of line with the academic understanding. One more thing I would add, we wouldn't say this is what's wrong with science, or this is why it's... We would say, which is the correct answer, it is the beauty of science that it changes. It is the beauty of science that it changes. Because if science didn't change, we would still be believing in old ancient theories, we wouldn't be making progress. The very reason why science progresses is because its conclusions change. That's the beauty of science. It's not a limitation of science. And always, and I do this in my discussions, and we all should be doing this, always go back to, especially if you're dealing with somebody who's got this sort of Western superiority complex, right? Say, yeah, that's great, you guys, you're doing quite well in science, and stuff like this, but remember, you did get it from the Muslim world. Whatever you're achieving now, it's all because of the Muslims. You do realize that, don't you? And you do realize that he was a Quranic scholar, and he said what inspired him to do science was God, and the foundation of the scientific worldview that he came up with is directly linked to the Quran as well. Because all it's about is, it's not about getting into these things, have you stopped being your wife here, and getting into discussions. It's about breaking assumptions. Going to the very foundations. This is actually the Taymiyyah approach. You just go straight to the root. What is this thing based upon? And then you challenge it from there. You're saying something, Nadeem?
Because we're doing it live, there's some questions from online.
Yes.
For you. Two questions. First question, will science ever disprove the Quran or Islam?
Okay. Again, somebody comes with a question like that. Jazakallah khair, Nadeem. Somebody comes with a question like that. Now there's a automatic dichotomy between science, Quran. Based upon what we learned so far, how would you address it? Someone has answered so far. Someone has answered. I think you... No, you didn't answer, yes.
It's basically the same thing as what Dawkins was doing. Is using science as a yardstick for the truth. Believing that it will change its nature and it will come one time which definitely will lead you a truth and it will stop changing basically, which cannot happen because it will keep on changing.
Okay.
About observations. Why?
Excellent. Yes.
Suboor, I'd like to add to this question, subhanAllah. I notice it's a social problem within the Muslim community, subhanAllah. A lot of Muslims have the hidden belief, the hidden first principle, if I have to say it that way, that truth has to be validated and verified through science.
Yes.
They even, subhanAllah, even Quran, they verify it through science, validate it through science.
Yes.
And a lot of Muslims, subhanAllah, you mentioned the example of your daughter,
Yes.
subhanAllah, from since they are kids, they have been ingrained.
Scientific proof.
Scientific proof that science is the only method of attaining
certainty,
subhanAllah. So this is indeed a misconception
it's
that needs to be...
It's a deeper epistemic problem.
Yeah.
It's a deeper epistemic problem. I like the way you answered it, although I think you left something out. Yes.
I think I agree with all that we say.
It's a very non-Italian thing to do.
Well, but at the same time, subhanAllah, you teach us, mashallah, jazakallah khair, that in the 70s or 100 years ago, science say that the sun don't have an orbit, and the Quran say that the sun have an orbit. So
according to some understandings of that verse.
Yes.
Yeah.
So even if the science says something about that contradict the Quran, we still believe in the Quran, and we are open because we know that science change.
Yes. See, the way you've answered that is very similar to the way that he answered it, which is good. But there's something missing, and it's related to the false dichotomy. The question that was asked was, can science ever disprove the Quran? We can paraphrase the question as saying, can science ever give you truth? Then show the difference between the public and the academic understanding. If we answer the question directly, we are accepting the war between Islam and science. So what's better to do is to take the question and say, what your question really means is, can science lead to certainty? And I say this in my discussions, in my when I'm speaking to even atheists. I say, even if I was a non-Muslim, I could have said this. The popular understanding is this, the academic understanding is this. Khalas. Because you want to show, we hold this view about the philosophy of science, not because we're Muslims, but because this is a view that any person would hold about the philosophy of science, because this is the mainstream view. Never ever accept the false dichotomy. The false dichotomy, religion versus science. Don't accept that. Go back to what the question is actually saying. So, for example, the question, who made God, is really asking the question, who created the uncreated one? How do we know God is uncreated? Because of this. So, answering a question directly, like, have you stopped beating your wife yet? That's a problem. You have to first break down what the question actually means and break the false dichotomy between religion and science. Between Islam in particular and science.
So actually it's developing the skill of fishing out the assumptions out of a statement.
Yes.
So if you're good at that, then you can take over and take the lead in the conversation and,
yes.
And break down his first principle, deconstruct
sure.
to reconstruct.
And what you've covered here, by the way, I haven't actually covered much content, if you realize, in this lecture. I was actually saying the same thing again and again. What I was saying was, this is a popular understanding, this is an academic understanding, and I was giving you different examples. All you need to do is to take the wind out of someone's sort of argument, is simply show how they're not in line with mainstream academia. That's it. That is all you need to do, even if you use one example. So for example, sometimes this actually happens when someone comes up and says, right, the Islam is wrong or the Quran is wrong because of this. Sometimes what you can simply do is simply ask them, and this actually works, simply ask them, what do you mean by that? So that's scientific theory. Have you actually read it? Most people, I'm telling you this from experience, and you probably know this if you've dealt with people who come from these sort of things, it's all hearsay. They don't understand any other science. It's all, they've heard something on YouTube, they got a little bit excited and decided to talk to you. That's all it is. And all you need to do is to show them how, and they hate this, I'm telling you. Of course, people who are sincere, this will open up their heart, but people who are like militant in their, and we're du'at, we're involved with sometimes meeting those people who are very militant in their beliefs, all you simply need to do is show how their popular understanding is disconnected to the academic understanding. Now you're not pitting religion versus science, Islam versus science, you're pitting popular understanding, misrepresentation, propaganda versus mainstream academia. And that just makes them look really silly, because it looks like it's them versus all of science. So for example, and I'm going to be covering this in my next session.
There's more questions.
Yes, I'm going to be covering this in my next session. Sometimes people ask me, how is it possible that 99% of biologists believe in Darwinian evolution, right? You have to accept it. I simply go down the route of what does belief in evolution mean? According to all evolutionary biologists and philosophers of science, it's based on a probabilistic framework which has assumptions, which has disputes. I accept that. But your notion of belief is it's true as the things you feel, which is not right. You'll always find that there's hidden assumptions there. And those are the assumptions that you actually have to uncover. Yes, Nadeem.
Can we say that the science in the Quran is tomorrow's science?
Okay, this is a very good question, and all of you guys here know enough to break down that question. Someone who hasn't spoken yet, I'm going to speak on you. No. He did a heavy gym session today, that's why he's out of it. Because you know, Icelandic people, they do press ups in their sleep, I heard.
That's my point, right? I mean, what I would say, I would just step back what we said in the course. And I would say that science doesn't mean certainty, and science change, actually. Change, it always changes, so we have no way to say that tomorrow will be the same.
Yes.
So we have no way to say that tomorrow it will be like the Quran or different, right?
Excellent. Everyone understand what you said?
Yeah, so the Quran doesn't change, so anyway,
Yeah.
there will be different.
So, there's no guarantee that what's in the Quran is tomorrow's science.
Yeah.
But there's also something else we can add. Why do you feel, as Sufyan said, why do you feel you have to validate the Quran using science? Why? That's the hidden inferiority complex. You know, I was looking up this, it's really disgusting, but I'm not sure if you're live so I can say this, well I'll say this anyway. Who cares? Bani Israel are the previous nation who we're going to follow inch by inch, step by step, even if they go into the lizard hole. What they did in the past is what we're doing. So they came across, for example, the Christians and the Jewish people, they came across Greek proto-science, and they started to understand their scripture through that scientific lens. So they had, for example, when Galileo came up and Kepler, and they were challenging certain views of astronomy, the Christians had used the Greek proto-science and they'd merged that with Christian theology, and they claimed the universe looked in a certain way, right? And they started believing in this, and then they got attacked. And so the same sort of science in the Quran they did before. Also, they had such an inferiority complex, the ancient people, the ancient Muslims if you like, the Jews and the Christians, the ancient Muslims, that the superpower at the time of some 2,000 or 3,000 years ago was who? The Greeks. They were seen as the masters of logic, the masters of rhetoric, the masters of literature. And what did the Muslims at the time, the Bani Israel, what did the Muslims at the time do? They copied them in everything. To the point, and when I discovered this, I was disgusted, right? The Greeks used to have these baths, right? And they used to go out naked after having a bath, and you used to have the man in his pride standing there, right? And they were uncircumcised. So the Jews, who were the Muslims at the time, they uncircumcised themselves to look like the Greeks because they had an inferiority complex about them. They tugged on their foreskins until they basically had uncircumcised themselves. And there's even a scientific term for this which I forgot. That's the level of inferiority complex they had when it came to Greek science, Greek proto-science, because they were seen as the global cultural superpower, which at the moment is the West. So the Muslims, what are they doing? I'm talking about the sort of liberal sort of ones, if you even use the word liberal, the confused ones. That's what they're doing. They have such an inferiority complex that they're willing to, the Quran has the Higgs boson, the Quran has this, the Quran has the iPhone, Quran has this, Quran has that, Quran has black holes, Quran, so if you say Quran has the Big Bang, which some Muslims say, the Big Bang's in the Quran, what's going to happen, say, like for example, the physicist Sean Carroll, he's putting forth a model of an eternal universe again. And he's trying to promote that amongst physicists. What if his model becomes famous again? Then all the people who believe the Quran is true because of the Big Bang, they are going to say, oh, the Quran's wrong now because the Quran doesn't have, the Big Bang is not true. The fact of the matter is, and this, you should try this out. If we're just to go by so-called miracles, okay, so, Osama, I come to you with a new religion. This new religion has a book, and the book has scientific miracles, somehow. It has historical miracles about the future. It has predictions which have come true. If you open it up on a random page, it can tell you your mother's maiden name. Everything. Amazing miracles. But this book says God has an elephant head and sits on a throne and throws lightning down, and there's 2 demigods with him. Would you believe in this religious book?
No.
Why?
Because it contradicts my personal...
It contradicts Tawheed. It contradicts what you know to be true even before scripture, even before reasoning, which is La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah doesn't need evidence. Muhammad Rasulullah does. Yeah? La ilaha illallah doesn't. Because if we're just to go by miracles, you would accept this book. Well, guess what? Dajjal's going to come with miracles. He's going to command the sky to rain, it rains. He's going to command the earth to grow, it grows. If we are people of miracles who follow science and follow whatever miracles, we should all follow Dajjal. May Allah protect us, yeah? We don't go by miracles. Miracles, you'd be surprised. I actually know a brother who nearly left Islam. He's from a Christian background. He nearly left Islam to become a Christian because he saw Christians do miracles. He actually had evidence of them doing supernatural things. Only because he was new in Islam, only when he discovered the jinn and the fact that jinns can do these things, did he come back to Islam properly again. We don't go by miracles, yeah? These abstract proofs. We go by what the Sahaba went by. The Sahaba knew this was the truth because it taught them what they already knew to be true, which was La ilaha illallah. That's the foundation. And Allah is my witness, we got a phone call here in the office, a brother who accepted Islam. He was from a Nordic type of, ancient UK pagan religion where they have many gods, right? He's from one of these religions. And he said, and this is not a conversation I heard from him, I spoke to the guy, and Allah is my witness, I had this conversation. He said to me, and he rang the office because he wanted to leave Islam after accepting Islam. So I asked him what the problem was. He said, I used to be a pagan, follower of this pagan religion, and in our pagan religions we had many statues and gods, and we had the supreme creator. One day I asked the supreme creator to guide me to the truth. All love for idols left my heart, and I went on a journey and I discovered Islam. When I prayed to the supreme creator and I rejected the idols in my religion. And he says, now I am Muslim and I am living amongst Muslims. when I went to the mosque, they had a picture of a sheikh and they were asking me to pray to God through the sheikh. He said, if this is Islam, I want to leave Islam. Wallahi, he said this to me. He said, they are making me, teaching me to worship other than God, and the only reason I believe Islam to be true is because it teaches me God is worthy of worship. Who's right? I said to him, you are right and they are wrong. And when I explained to him how he believed, his belief in Tawheed was not based upon him reading the book of Tawheed, right? It was based upon his fitrah, and that's why he accepted Islam. And he wanted to leave Islam when he thought Islam was not a religion of Tawheed. So when I explained to him, you are right, he is wrong, he said, I'm not going to leave Islam. This is the truth. The proof of Islam is Tawheed. And the proof of the existence of God is the connection you have with God when you worship Him. This is Islam. It's not based upon, the expansion of the universe. We created everything from water. Yeah? Islam, if a building is built upon strong foundations, you can carry on building, you can carry on building, you can carry on building. But if the building has cracks, you will always be wary about building new floors. If the foundations of belief, if the pillars of Iman are weak, you're not going to take action as a Muslim. And that's why we need to, even when we teach this stuff, this reinforces for the Muslims what they themselves don't know. I heard a really powerful statement, and I want to sort of end on this before taking other questions. I heard this from a very prominent scholar, a very prominent student of Shaykh Albani, direct student of Shaykh Albani. He said, ignorance is the bid'ah of this ummah. Whenever we talk about bid'ah, we talk about, okay, he did this thing, so it's not allowed. He said, ignorance, being ignorant in your religion, this is a bid'ah. And this is the reason why we're facing the issues that we're facing. When we went to, for example, Medina, myself and Hamza, and Hamza gave the philosophy of science to the Medina graduates that were there was no problem. They already knew this stuff. Why? Because they knew the foundations of the religion. They knew that, we had fatwas from back in the 1980s and 90s which was condemning the science miracle stuff. The scientific miracles in the Quran we didn't give up because it was wrong. In the 1980s and 90s, scholars were speaking out against it. But no one wanted to listen because we wanted to follow famous people. And this is why we're facing the issues that we're facing today, because we are ignorant of even the foundations of our own religion.
And I only want to make a statement, subhanAllah. Nowadays, Iman is built upon science.
Sorry?
Iman is built upon science, subhanAllah. Iman is based upon science nowadays. If you understand where I'm going.
Yes. Although what I would say is that it's an excuse. So people already believe Islam is true, and as a confirmation bias they use science. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because I have met people who, when you ask them why they're Muslim, they'll come up with scientific miracles. When you show them that that's wrong, they'll still believe, because they were just trying to explain why they believe something in their heart is true, and they decided to use that. But in reality, that's not why they really have Iman. The Iman is because of Tawheed, or they read the life of the Prophet ﷺ, or the prophecies, or all these types of things.
Actually,
let me take this one first, then I'll take your question, Nadeem.
Last question
is actually
his question first, then we'll do yours.
It's not a question by the same. Actually, what they try to do is the same thing of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Yatma'inna qalbi. So he says that. So they try to grab to these kind of things, but they don't know the risk actually of grabbing to these kind of things. And we just have to let them know that these things, like science, for example, is something that can change. So it's actually dangerous to just grab things, as Ibrahim alayhi salam grabbed to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him from him straight.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing to keep in mind is this. I gave this example to a confused Muslim who came up to me after a talk and said to me, how do you achieve certainty? Because it was night time, I asked him to look at the stars. I said to him, if these stars in front of you realign to La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah in the sky, no one saw it but you, and it's clear, will you ever doubt Islam after that point? He said no. I said, what if you come across somebody saying to you Islam is wrong because of this or that, or hadith is wrong, or would you ever doubt after that point? He said no. I said, so all you need is one clear evidence, and Allah says in the Quran, we will show them the signs in the horizons and within themselves until they know that this is the truth. Allah will give you signs in your life which are the equivalent of the moon splitting for you. It may not mean anything to anybody else, but in you, for you, you know that this is the truth. And once you see that, then there's no more excuse for doubt, because you've seen that absolute proof. La ilaha illallah doesn't need that proof, but Muhammad Rasulullah does. Right? And anybody that's searching, and this is my advice when I speak to some non-Muslims. I was speaking to a non-Muslim recently. He wanted to have loads and loads of debates about God, and he said, what about this, what about that? I just stopped the conversation. I said, if you want guidance, ask for it, you will get it. It's not possible somebody asks for guidance and doesn't get it. That's not possible. That's not who Allah is. You want guidance, you get it. Anybody that's sincere, anybody that's looking, they will get guided. Why? Because Allah makes it clear. Whoever wants guidance, He gives them. Whoever doesn't want guidance, He doesn't force them. He turns them away. In fact, I heard this from a student of knowledge, and he was using a tafsir of the Quran. He said, when people turn, then Allah makes them turn. So when you turn away, then Allah misguides you. It's not got to do with Allah just randomly, okay, you go, misguidance. It doesn't work like that. You're the one who makes the choice. You could be the son of an idol worshipper in a country of idol worship where everybody's a disbeliever and still be a Muslim like Ibrahim alayhi salam. Or you could be born in Medina, or you could be the son of a prophet like Nuh alayhi salam's son and be a disbeliever even though you see the beginning of the flood. Remember, he disbelieved when he saw the beginning of the flood. And what does he do? He says, I believe in philosophical naturalism. Did he really say that in the Quran? Yes, he did, because he said, the mountain will protect me. Physical causation. Right? The reality is, anybody who understands the foundations of Iman, they will not fall into this nonsense. It's because we do not know our own religion. So even this is a great way of teaching people even what the foundations of their own religion is.
Someone's asking, so is it best not to mention science while engaging in that?
No, I would use science. I would use the scientific miracle. I would use one scientific miracle, which is all of science today. Every single scientific technology that we have today, every single conclusion, every single theory goes back to Hassan ibn Haytham, who was a Quranic scholar who was inspired by the Quran. That's a scientific miracle for you. You want a greater miracle than that? That's a sociological miracle. No Quran, no Hassan ibn Haytham, no scientific revolution, no Renaissance, no modern Western scientific world. In fact, we have non-Muslim Western historians saying this. If it wasn't for the Muslims, we wouldn't have Western civilization as we have it today.
You have a name?
It's all going to be in our book, Failed Hypothesis, inshallah. I don't remember the names at the top of my head. That's a scientific miracle you can use. And that's something that is not going to be challenged by induction, because that's a testimonial fact from history. That's one scientific miracle which is irrefutable. And that's a sociological miracle. How long do we have before the break?
We've got 4 minutes, so I'll do one quick
4 minutes and then they have a break?
break for 20 minutes.
Fine. 4 minutes, okay.
Do one quick question, unless the brother's got a question here.
Let's focus on the class first, then we'll do Facebook. Yes.
So you were talking about popular understanding of science.
Yes.
And versus an academic understanding of science. And you need to dissect. You need to tell them that their understanding is not based upon academic understanding of science. Could you state that their understanding is not scientific academically?
I wouldn't put it that way. I would say your philosophical understanding of science is wrong.
That was my next question. Or could you say their philosophical understanding of science is not
So their actual understanding of what science is. Because they may know the science really well. They may know, for example, the details of quantum theory really, really well. But we're not talking about the details of quantum theory. Which is why when you go through this philosophy of science, and this is, if you know anything about the philosophy of science, we've just scratched the surface. Right? But this is enough to dismantle that sort of nonsense narrative. This is more than enough. All you simply need to do is any scientific theory which somebody brings up and tries to claim is true, you use this approach, you don't need to know any of the science. It's good if you know the science, but it's not necessary, because you could just go down this route. It's like a Christian coming up to you and saying, Jesus is God because John 3:16, because of this, because of Revelation. Or you can say, I've never read the Bible, but it was put together over 300 years, you have different versions, it's not reliable, khalas. They can know all of the references. And normally in debates you get a Muslim and a Christian, they're doing ping pong. One gives them a verse, one gives them a verse. They're going, yeah, you know, the Muslim knows more of, he's done hifz of the Bible, he's read it more than the Quran. It's true.
No.
And even scientific miracle promoters, and I used to be one of them many years ago, before, when I was ignorant of this stuff, I used to believe. I didn't believe in Islam because of it. I believe in Islam because I believe in Islam. I believe that there's none worthy of worship except Allah. That made sense. And reading up the life of the Prophet ﷺ gave me certainty this is a true prophet. I don't know how to articulate this to people, so I just started using science in the Quran. When I realized it's wrong, it didn't affect my iman. I just thought, okay, it's wrong. You move on.
So I'd like to make a distinction. Indeed, the iman is not based upon science.
Yes.
It's based upon fitrah, let's say fitrah.
Yes, of course.
But can we say, because iman and yaqeen are two different things, can we say a lot of people that yaqeen is based upon science? That's certainty.
But the thing is, here's the thing. I'm not going to answer your question. I'm just going to ask a question. How can your certainty be based on something which is uncertain?
Exactly. Very good question.
If that's the case, and remember always, miracles, 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 we should follow Dajjal then.
Yeah.
His miracles are going to be, he's going to bring back the dead with Allah's permission. If we're just going to go by proof, miracles, Dajjal.
Another question, how can you...
How can you say, I will achieve certainty using something which is uncertain? And trust me, I'm just giving you the psychology because a lot of the people we're going to be dealing with are atheist type people. I have met different types of atheists. It's very hard to put them into categories because it's kind of like herding cats. There's a lot of ikhtilaf and differences of opinion amongst them. But there's two broad categories which I want to share. In fact, three. The first category is the general people who call themselves atheists. They're not here or not there, they just follow. They don't know what they're doing. Two, you get the militant atheists who truly believe in atheism and they truly understand the implications of atheism, and they are depressed and they think life is meaningless and they can't be bothered to do anything. And three, you get the atheists who are militant, who are online, who are attacking religion, and they are the ones who are not sure of atheism. They have doubts about atheism. And they need to constantly attack other people's religion to reinforce their worldview. The ones you'll come across online are these types of atheists who are unsure of atheism. Because let me tell you this, I don't believe in fairies. I don't believe in fairies. But I don't attend conferences about fairies. I don't read books why fairies don't exist. I don't debate with people who believe in fairies. I've got better things to do. They spend money, resources, they fly from one location to another, they write to each other, they do degrees to give themselves yaqeen that there is no God. Because they are unsure. And wallahi, I love to just watch their videos and stuff amongst themselves, and Allah is my witness, I have heard from their own mouths them say, some of them privately to each other as well, I'm afraid of hell. Wallahi, I'm not kidding. Why? Actually, sorry, this is not privately, this is even publicly. Watch a video called Scared of Hell Atheists. They're serious. I'm not scared of Ganesh punishing me. I'm not going to insult Hinduism, but I'm not scared of Ganesh. Why are they afraid of hell? This is the fitrah. This is deep down inside human being knows there is something more. Right? And have you guys done the moral argument yet?
No.
Okay. You're going to find this, you know, I believe in science, I believe in this, I believe in that. So you can say to them, okay, there's a child and you run over the child with a car. Show me scientifically how that's wrong. You can't.
You can't.
According to pure materialism, this is matter, I am matter. You smash the TV with a hammer, or you smash my brain and my grey matter falls out, if it's grey. They both matter, rearrangement of matter. What's the difference between the two? Technically there's no difference. So the atheists who truly believe in atheism, they truly have belief that atheism is true, they don't promote atheism. I'm telling you, they don't promote atheism. And I've met atheists like that. I've met former atheists like that as well. they know atheism is true and they understand everything is meaningless, there's no morality, there's no right and wrong, and they themselves are stuck in that, and that they don't promote atheism, they're just there. You get the ones who are unsure of atheism, and they're the ones that attack other people to achieve yaqeen themselves, but they never achieve it. And Allah says, rather they're not certain. Rather they're not certain. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to have a 20-minute break. We're back at what time, Nadeem? 4:15. Inshallah. Rather, actually, they're all not certain. The ones who argue against religion are less certain. But in reality, none of them are certain, even the ones who are confused. It's true. Yes. Mohsen, shall I keep these on?
I can turn it off for now.